This is TruthQuest, uncovering the powerful technologies, visionary strategies, and compelling stories that fuel our quest for clarity and authenticity in a rapidly changing world. From groundbreaking innovations to real-life success stories, we take a deep dive into how individuals and businesses are harnessing truth tech to change their lives and create meaningful change. We believe that everyone deserves to know the truth. This is TruthQuest. And now your hosts, Dr. Bryan and Mary Claire.
Welcome to TruthQuest. I'm Dr. Bryan.
And I'm Mary Claire.
And we're your hosts. We are going to dive into new technologies and stories about people's quest for truth and the impact it has on their lives. In today's program, we explore the history of truth verification technologies in Australia and their use cases, starting with the polygraph and then moving to more recent technologies like Eichenno's ocular motor deception technology.
I get the privilege once again of introducing our guest here. I've had the privilege of getting to know Steve over the last handful of months. Steve is an author, speaker, media commentator, and trainer. He's known as an expert in the field of behavioral interviewing, reading body language, and detecting deception. He has conducted behavioral interviews and polygraph tests on 87 homicide and 2 serial killer investigations and consults his services to Fortune 500 companies, police departments, intelligence agencies, and government departments throughout the world. Steve's appeared on CNN, Access Hollywood, The Newsroom, and many other programs, is affectionately referred to as the human lie detector, and most recently starred in a TV series called The Hunters, which we'll dive into here later. As a former police officer, having trained with the FBI, LAPD, and the U.S. Secret Service, he has emerged as a leading authority on reading and analyzing human behavior. Welcome, Steve.
Welcome, Steve.
Hi, guys. Great to be here.
Thanks so much for taking time. We coordinated calendars. Steve's in Australia, so it's not a crazy time in any one of our worlds. So thanks for working with us, Steve. I just want to kick off. I have loved getting to know about Steve's background. So, Steve, give us a little bit. I feel like I scratched the surface. So tell us a little bit about your story. It's a good one.
So in 1996, I was a police detective, and I was always interested in psychological profiling, what makes serial killers and serial sex offenders tick. So I was fortunate enough to go over to the FBI Behavioural Sciences Unit. But ironically, the more I learned about profiling, the more interested I become in cognitive and behavioural interviewing. I wanted to know why some of the detectives that I worked with were not very good at reading people, or more importantly, detecting deception. So while I was in the States, some of the FBI agents I was working with said, "Oh, Steve, do you use polygraph testing in your police department?" And back then, it wasn't used. I said, "No, not really." I said, it's very American, very Canadian. And I said, "Oh, look, we use it for frauds, extortions, homicides, sexual offences, counterintelligence. Why don't you come over and train with us? And then you can take that technology back." So effectively, that's what I did. So I initially trained at Western Oregon University under Dr. Stan Abrams, and I did my polygraph internship with LAPD. They have a polygraph unit, which falls within their scientific investigation division. So I spent some time with those guys. Back then, it was predominantly gang-related homicide cases. Then spent some time with the FBI field office in LA, US Secret Service, LA County Sheriffs, and then come back to Australia and did a number of presentations to our chief of police. And eventually, they said, "Look, we think this is a great idea," but they wanted to do a bit more research and whatnot. And eventually, it took a number of years, and I eventually resigned from the police. So I spent 14 years in South Australian Victoria Police, and ironically, within 2 weeks after I resigned, the Homicide Cold Case Unit contacted me and said, "Listen, we've got a number of homicide cases we want you to work with us on." But they also knew I do a lot of training in how to read people, detect deception through verbal, non-verbal, and paralinguistic behaviours. So it just sort of snowballed from there. Then all of a sudden I started getting requests to train homicide detectives in how to detect deception, but also how to read body language. Because, as you know, there's a lot of myths out there about body language and whatnot. So then a company by the name of Converis contacted me a number of years ago, and they said, "Look, we're working on this new technology, and we think it would be really helpful in some of the cases you work on." But back then, they didn't have the facility for myself to actually answer the questions,
Right.
construct the questions. And as you
Yeah.
know, in any testing, the questions have to be clear and concise, so there's no room for misinterpretation, ambiguity, or anything like that. So even though back then I thought it was a great technology, obviously privacy issues about sending, information about homicide cases to a third party, all that type of thing. And it just grew from there.
Fantastic. So, I love this, the human lie detector, Steve, and I'm fascinated by, the serial killers and the cases that you've solved. Love to know more about, you told us a little bit about your background and how that's kind of come about. But you've obviously had some successes doing this. Can you tell us some stories? Can you tell us a little bit about some of the things you've done?
Yeah. So, early in my career, I was just fascinated with human behaviour. What makes people do what they do, and I also have a background in criminology, and psychology. So I was interested in that perspective. But some of the cases that the homicide squad here in Australia, just to put you in the picture, I live in Victoria in Australia. Now we have the second largest police department, unlike the States where you have PDs and county sheriffs. We have one police department that covers the whole state. So to put you in the picture, we've got about 12,000 sworn officers in Victoria alone. So it's quite a big police department. And in New South Wales, I think they're up to about 16,000 sworn members. So anyway, part of the process was, look, we think it's great to do polygraph testing, but what if for some reason someone refuses or they're not going to participate? Then they said, look, can you run training courses in how to read people and detect deception? So I did. So one particular case that really stands out was the murder of rape and murder of a young girl, a 6-year-old girl by the name of Bonnie Clark. And the homicide squad were pretty convinced that Marion Weishart, the mother, was involved in her murder. Now, statistically, it's very rare for a mother to sexually abuse their daughter. Physically, maybe, but sexually, it's quite unusual. So I was asked to go and interview, do a behavioural analysis type of interview, but also do a polygraph test on Marion to work out whether or not she was involved. Now, when I spoke to her, one of the things that the FBI teach their agents is to benchmark and baseline behaviours and look for deviations from that normative behaviour. So, but also to ask behaviour analysis questions, because truthful people will be very upfront, direct. They'll take ownership and possession of the story, whereas deceptive people create distance, disassociation, and separation. So that could be in language, that could be in use of pronouns or lack of pronouns, all that type of thing. So I was asked to analyse the content and structure of what she was saying, even before we did the test, the polygraph test. And I said to her, look, I'm not a police detective. I was, but I'm not now. I'm not acting for the police or you. But what I want you to do is take me through everything that happened. Give me an open narrative of what happened. Which she did. And I said, look, I'm informed that you haven't been cooperative with the police. Why is that? And she said, well, I'll tell you why. It was because on the day that I buried my daughter, I was arrested. And she said, from that moment onwards, I decided that I'm not going to have anything to do with them. I'm not going to help them or anything. So anyway, I asked a number of behavioural questions. Pretty obvious to me she was, in fact, being very direct, succinct, truthful and whatnot. And we did the polygraph test, and that also came up with the same conclusion. She was not involved. And I remember specifically, we're driving back to Melbourne, the capital city of where I live, and I'm with a couple of homicide detectives, and they said, Steve, we think you got it wrong. I said, well, you're entitled to your opinion, but there's very little doubt in my mind, in the absence of forensic, scientific, medical or cooperative evidence, that Marion is involved in the murder. So about a couple of months later, I was contacted by a detective working on the case, and he said, Steve, you're not going to believe this. We've just arrested someone in relation to Bonnie's murder. I said, I guarantee it wasn't Marion, the mother. He goes, correct. It was actually the previous boarder. What had happened was, because there were no signs of forced entry into the house, so there was key used. He used a key to get in there. he sexually assaulted her. She woke up, screamed, and then stabbed her through the chest with a knife.
Oh,
So
jeez.
sometimes, and you look, I'm as a former detective. Sometimes I can go to a crime scene. I can tell you pretty quickly whether or not the crime scene stage, whether or not the offender spent time with the victim post-mortem, whether the body's been moved, all that type of thing. So I often say that part of the process is A, being a good listener, but B, asking the right questions, and C, becoming not just a question asker, but an analyst of human behaviour. So it's understanding how we use language. A great example, Brian, if I asked you what you did yesterday, neurologically through sensory input, you'd be able to tell me what you did, what you heard, what you saw, what you felt, conversations, because you lived through them. Whereas
Right.
if you're likely to fabricate or embellish or create a false memory that never existed, for every one lie you tell, you have to invent 2, 3, 4 to protect yourself from the first one.
Oh,
So cognitively, we know that when a person is lying, it creates a lot of cognitive load.
yeah.
And sometimes it will reflect itself in a number of ways. So it could be response latency, a lot of unnecessary or superfluous fillers, ums and ahs, all those type of things. But also, a truthful person will often tell you not just what they saw, but how they felt. Deceptive people can't do that because if they're involved in the particular
Yeah.
crime, it actually gives themselves away. So
Yeah.
some of the behavioural analysis questions are predicated on the basis a truthful person will clear themselves, whereas a deceptive person will be evasive, omissive, dismissive, sidestep the issue, and so on. So holistically, I look for 3 areas: verbal, non-verbal, and paralinguistic.
Wow.
Fantastic.
Holy
Yeah,
cow.
just to follow up on that really quickly, do you see other police departments doing what you're doing? I know you're training a lot of these others. Are you seeing more of these things, more experts in these areas, picking these tools up, using these tools? Because we're going to get to technology here in a minute, but just what we do as humans and how well we pick this up as humans. Do you see us finding ways to do that better?
Absolutely. I have been training a group here, which is like an anti-corruption commission, which investigates, politicians and police officers and so on. And people often say, is there such a thing as a bad interviewee? I don't think there is. I think there is such a thing as a bad interviewer because, A, they don't ask the right questions. They don't look for conflict or contradiction between what a person's saying, what their body language is in fact stating. So I teach people to analyse human behaviour, but also, does my question become the threatening stimulus which induces a change in behaviour? If that's the case, and they're evasive, omissive, dismissive, they're hand-to-face masking, blocking, concealment behaviours, they're not answering the question, sidestepping, all that type of thing together with changes in body language can be important. So there's always, I went through 2 police departments in detective training school, and to be honest, I used to think I was a great interviewer until I did training in adaptive interviewing, and then all of a sudden it finally clicked. Right? We know through research, if you blame somebody for their behaviour, you make it substantially more difficult for them to confess. So I can't, and I know Australia's legal system based on, Commonwealth laws and whatnot is a little bit different from the US system, but in Australia, I can't use trickery, deception, or deceit to obtain a confession or admission. I can't say, well, Brian and Mary Claire, I found your fingerprints at the scene of a crime. And you go, okay, you've got me. And you roll over, you make admissions that I didn't have any other cooperative evidence before. So in the interviewing sphere, I mean, and I'm sure you've probably had it yourself, you interview somebody and they may be a witness, but some of the things they say, well, hang on a minute, it's out of context, which may implicate them as a possible suspect. So, I think there's always areas for improvement. And a lot of my training as a policeman and police detective was very basic in that, you put what we call the points of proof to the person, you negate any potential defences or alibis, and then you look for other cooperative evidence, whether it be scientific, medical, ballistic, fingerprints, DNA, blood, whatever it may be. So I think it's having the ability to, A, build rapport, B, ask the right questions, C,
Yeah.
analyze the content and structure of what they're saying. See, people often won't lie to you. They'll just edit the information they supply you with unless they've got no other choice. So
Oh, that's
that,
interesting.
Yeah.
and I'll see that all the time, because what happens is it's, and research is pretty clear on this, it's very difficult for the average person to lie and to lie convincingly. But we also know that humans are not very good at picking up those behavioral signs or cues. And there's a number of reasons why. Sometimes I remember interviewing one of the most pleasant serial killers you'll ever meet. Now, the thing is he looked like your typical grandfather. So, of course, I had in my mind that this guy was, a monster. But believe it or not, he was very affable, very intelligent. And, I remember that night going home, and I had a massive headache, and he was playing games. And even research shows that psychopaths are not that good at lying. There will be telltale signs, but here's the difference. And I remember Mary Ellen O'Toole used to be in charge of the FBI profiling unit telling me this. One of her pet hates was a lot of agents and detectives, when interviewing a clinically diagnosed psychopath, may say questions like, try to help us understand, just imagine the pain and the suffering and the anguish the victims' families are going through. Well, think about that for a second. If you're a clinically diagnosed psychopath who has
You
no
don't have any of
empathy,
those.
No.
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So another approach is to appeal to another emotion, and that's ego. How is it that you are so much smarter than we are? Or using a different behavioural approach. And I've, after my training and research and whatnot, I found that everyone, no matter who they are, will have some what I call leakage or seepage or some cue that they may feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's up to me as an investigator, interviewer, or whatever, to ask the right questions. I'll give you a real quick example. We had a case here where a young baby, a 12-month-old child, went missing. Now, I was asked by 60 Minutes Australia to conduct an interview and a polygraph test on the suspect. Now, they said, look, Steve, we want you to ask, do you know for certain where Jaden's body is? I said, well, that's not a good question. And they go, why? Surely if this suspect killed him, you know where the body is. I said, not necessarily. What if he had an accomplice and the accomplice disposed of the body? What if he threw the body off a bridge and it's 20 miles down the river? He may legitimately not know where the body is. So the question construction is paramount, because if your questions are not clear and concise, it allows a deceptive person room to wriggle out of.
Yeah.
So, Steve, is that why we read about or hear about kind of the broad, a really good polygrapher can get a really high accuracy, and then there's such thing as low accuracy? Is it? And I'm told it's often based on the effectiveness of the polygrapher themselves. One, is that true? How true is that? But two, and if so, it gets back to those three. I would assume it gets back to those kind of three key points that you talked about, and including sentence structure or question structure. And help me understand: is that variability and accuracy? Just curious, I'd like to learn a little bit more why it exists, or if it's real.
Sure. So the short answer is yes, that is true. We know the accuracy of, let's stick to polygraph for the moment, is dependent upon three variables. And that is A, that the examiner is properly trained, certified and qualified.
Yeah.
B, that it's a validated testing procedure. And C, that the questions are properly constructed. So I have seen tests that really don't comply with validated testing procedures. They breach the procedure because there's too many issues in the one test, and they compete against each other, thereby watering down the accuracy.
Yeah.
Secondly, I see the questions not properly constructed. I remember seeing a test that I was asked to analyse in relation to sexual assault in Indonesia. So they flew me over there to be as an expert witness, I guess, to look at the case. Now, to give an example, one of the questions was, did you rape and murder? And the girl's name. Now, the problem with that is he could have raped and not murdered. He could have murdered and not raped.
Yeah.
What part of the question is he passing or failing? So
Okay.
to answer your question, Mary Claire, the first thing is if the question's vague or non-specific, it allows a deceptive person to wriggle out of. I'll give you a great example. Another example. If I did a polygraph test or EyeDetect test or verify test on Bill Clinton and asked if he had a sexual relationship with Monica Lewinsky, and he said no, as humans, we're very good at minimizing, justifying, and rationalizing our behavior. So he could say to himself, well, technically, I didn't have a relationship with her. That's not a relationship. What it is a bad question.
Yeah.
So go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so I think effectively those three parameters have to be met. And when people start deviating is when we see problems.
Okay.
It's really interesting that in all of this, less is more. I'm just listening to what you're saying. It's funny. Sometimes we'll get people who want to answer, they want to ask 60 questions or 30 questions. And it's like, just pick one or two. I mean, even more than that, you start to get over this overlap and this crosstalk and accuracy goes down. But that's a counterintuitive observation. So I'm glad you brought it up because, I mean, just getting at the heart of a really good question and getting that answer has a ton of value.
I think, in my opinion, in my view, and I've done thousands of interviews and worked on many homicide cases, is that you have to ensure the question is clear and concise, number one. Number two, you need to look for the reaction to that question. But number three, it's having the ability to build a rapport, because you think about this. I'll give you another example. I was interviewing myself and my partner. We're interviewing a well-known pedophile in Flemington, where I used to work. And my partner says, if you don't tell us what you did to this kid, we're going to lock you up. You're going to go to jail. Your wife's going to leave you. Your kids won't talk to you. Just gave him 1,000 reasons why not to confess, not one reason why you should or could. So my partner, playing the bad cop, leaves the room, and I'm in the room with the suspect, and I don't say anything. To your point, Bryan, sometimes less is more. And he looks at me, and I'm just not saying a word. He looks at me and he says, which I thought was a very interesting question. He said, "Do you think I did this?" I said, "You know what? I don't care if you did this. I've got one question and one question only." And then I didn't say anything. Invariably, he said, "What's that?" And I said, "Did you mean to hurt her?" And this is what he did. Simple as that. He nodded his head. Now, there's a partial admission. That's something I can work with. So it's understanding the psychology, because if you admit to me that you've been involved, guess what? You're going to be charged. You're going to go to jail. So think about it. Psychologically, there's a lot riding on that response. So it's about understanding human behavior. It's about understanding what makes humans tick. So one of the processes that I use that works very effectively is not to blame them. I might use a theme like, you know what? Everyone does things they're not proud of. Everyone makes mistakes. You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. Compared to a lot of people I deal with, you're not a bad person. People are not going to judge you by one act. They're going to judge you by the totality of all the things you've done in your life. And I guess the question is, do you feel sorry about this? And will it happen again? Now, I'm looking at their response, and I think about this. Somebody who's not involved is going to vehemently take you to task about that. But what are you talking about? I didn't do it. I wasn't involved. This is rubbish. This is bullshit. Blah, blah, blah. But somebody who, and make no mistake, it's a fact-finding mission, not just for the police or interviewers, but the suspect, because the suspect wants to know what you know about their involvement. So it's a real, balancing act in that, I didn't want to give away too much, because sometimes I can go into the interview and have nothing but their reaction to how they respond to questions. Other times I might have everything, and it really doesn't matter what they say, because I've got, I can connect them to DNA at the scene, at the time, CCTV, his phone is pinged at the crime scene, all that type of thing. So I always walk into every interview or every polygraph test with a clear mind. I listen to what the facts are, and then I construct the questions based on not what I think, not what I feel, just the facts. As long as you stick to that, often the questions will be quite comprehensive.
Yeah.
This is so fascinating.
Fascinating. Yeah, I agree. Amazing. I mean, Steve, obviously it'd be great if we could all have your skills and have your ability to understand and ask the right questions. But let's talk a little bit about the technology that you've used. You've talked about polygraph. You talked a little bit about EyeDetect. Talk a little bit about how you've used them, what you see coming in the future, what is changing about, I mean, because polygraph is, you're the one who brought it to Australia. It's been there a long time, and new technologies are now starting to come that are having better levels of reliability and accuracy. But just talk to us a little bit about kind of what you're seeing and what you think you'll see in the future.
Well, so from when I learnt how to conduct a polygraph, the old analog days with the pens and paper and all that type of thing, then it became computerized, which was a fantastic thing, and I'll tell you why. If you had an unethical examiner, you could increase the gain and get a pen flick, which looks like a reaction. You can't do that on computerized polygraph testing because any chart notation. So any chart notation, such as DB for deep breath, C for cough, SN for sneeze, will indicate a movement, not a autonomic response. So, as you know, in polygraph testing, it's predicated on the basis if you consciously decide that you're going to lie to a question, you become fearful of being caught in that lie. That's what innervates and activates changes in your autonomic nervous system. So we see corresponding changes in heart rate, blood pressure, blood volume, respiratory cycles, and so on. So that it's not the lie that induces a change, it's the fear of being caught in that lie that activates our fight or flight responses. So so then we've developed, as I said, Converse, come up with EyeDetect, which is a different technology. As you know, ocular looks for ocular changes, so and measures up to 350,000 metrics during the test, everything from pupil dilation, blink rate, eye fixation, response latency times, all that type of thing. Works on the same process, but measures different areas. So I tend to use both, actually. I use polygraph and EyeDetect together, which, on successive studies shows that if you're using two separate technologies and arriving at the same result, you can only increase the internal reliability, constructability, and accuracy of the testing process, as you know. Insofar as, and now Verify is great because it uses a mobile phone, so a link can be sent out, as you know, and there have been some great advancements because, when I first looked at Verify, my first question is, hang on, you send a link to someone, how do I know that person is doing the test and not handing the phone to someone else? Yeah. Well, of course, as you know, there are images taken at crucial moments during the testing process to validate that that's the first person, in fact, who's doing the test. So the advantage of that is you, can do mass amounts of testing, but more importantly, I mean, the applications are quite astounding. I mean, I am actually in the process of putting together a position paper for the Queensland government. Now, they have the opposition have just said that they're going to introduce a sex offender registry. And sex offender registers are great. However, one of the problems we've got here in Victoria is that there's been a 2,176% increase in failed to report contacts or communication with children, changes in addresses, and so on. So the registry is great, but you still need to ensure that the sex offender has a degree of accountability. So just by saying, and we know that fail to report these issues on the increase quite consistently over a long period of time. So it not only does it add accountability, but it also acts as an artificial conscience because they know, pretty much like Medford, Oregon, and many states in the US, as you know, where they have sex offender treatment or sex offender treatment and testing programs, they have to hold the person accountable. How do they do that? Well, they know if they're going to do a test and they're likely to, be engaged in sexual assault on a child, there are ramifications now for that behaviour. So but not only that, it can also affect behaviour when a sex offender may think, well, if I have to do a random or periodic maintenance testing or surveillance testing, so to speak, then if I get caught out, there are consequences. So as we know, the police can't be everywhere. Not all victims are capable of reporting sexual offences because of their age and so on. So I think there's great advancements there. And advancement I'm looking at the moment is face sweep. Because I've been doing this for a number of years and I thought, well, hang on a minute. Polygraph is predicated on the basis if someone lies, we see changes in heart rate. Well, what if the person's quite stressed, their heart rate's quite high, they're quite nervous, blah, blah, blah. So then I looked at facial recognition technology with micro data points on the face because I want to know, what does Bryan look like when he's lying? So how do we do that? How do we engage it? Well, we use this technology that puts 480 data points on the face and questions are asked of you, Bryan, and then it requests you to lie. So then I
directed
know,
lie. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I know what that. So the thing is, in initial test, we found that a computer, and so that even using pretty much like infrared eye scanner, can measure incredible changes, but this can measure a number of multiple of areas in the face, and it's all predicated on the basis of if we know what a person looks like, because I might be very different when I lie to, say, yourself, Mary Claire, or Brian.
Yeah.
So effectively, what does someone look like? So it's based on their own data that's collected, which is then used diagnostically to look for comparisons or a differential between the two. So there are a lot of advancements coming out in the future.
I just want to go back to one point you made about accountability and ongoing testing, preemptive testing. I think there are tremendous amounts of opportunities. I'm glad you brought that up as well. We see that same sort of opportunity. It just changes the behavior calculus, I think, in a lot of ways.
Well, let me give you one example. I was contacted the other day by the International Natural Bodybuilders Association, and of course, one of their issues.
I laugh because I've looked into this world, so keep going.
Well, as you know, there are a lot of competitors who use masking agents, anabolic steroids, banned substance, and all the rest of it. And in the early years, I used to do polygraph testing for them, and what we found was a lot of people, not a fair percentage, pulled out knowing that they were either going to have saliva or urine testing or polygraph testing. So you don't want those people in the competition having an unfair advantage to start with. But secondly, now with Verify technology, some of the advantages there is you can do a mass batch and send them out to, and I think one of their events, they have 300 competitors. So the advantage of that is they can do it, in their own time, in their own, comfort of their own, say 24 hours before the competition. So insofar as sex offender maintenance programs, it has application and utility. Insofar as honesty, integrity issues, identity issues, there are, and now it's not like you have to go see a polygraph examiner. You have to rely on the training. The thing I do like about Verify and EyeDetect is it's more standardized. So you don't have an issue where you have an examiner trying to be all to everyone, right? So you might have 10, 15 questions and you know that there's no validated testing procedure that can complement that. So with something like Verify or EyeDetect, it actually standardizes the testing process. Standardization is good.
Yeah.
That brings me actually back to a question from a benefit, from a polygraph perspective. You said developing this, I'm going back 10 minutes or so, but there's a benefit in developing a rapport, which you don't get with these technologies. Any reaction to, we've got the standardization, but you don't get the rapport? And maybe could be, depending on the situation or the use, the benefit of a mobile-based technology is the ability to scale that we talked about. But yeah, just curious of that perspective of you don't get the rapport, but you get the standardization, if you will. Any more to learn from that?
Yeah, well, even in that, I mean, I spend a lot of time in training investigators in building and establishing a rapport for two reasons. One is I teach investigators to baseline or benchmark. That's the first thing. But secondly, we know that people are not going to divulge information or take me into their confidence if they don't like or trust me. So it's a twofold effect. So it's building that confidence, building that rapport, but allowing them to have confidence in telling me, but not being judgmental. Look, my role as an investigator or interviewer is to elicit information, right?
Yeah.
So if I go in there and I don't establish a rapport, and I've seen it very often, I can say, I mean, we see this all the time, I can say something and upset you and not even realize as an interviewer, but by using a process where there's no prejudice, there's no bias, right? So if you think about it, if I think that you may be involved in a particular crime and I blurt out that, you're guilty, I know you're involved, now even a truthful person is going to draw a line in the sand and probably not participate in an interview or make a no-comment interview and all the rest of it. So I think if you are going to interview somebody and build rapport, that's fantastic, right? But everyone's different. I've seen some people don't care about building rapport. They'll just throw the whatever facts they are. But we're dealing with humans. We're dealing with people.
Yeah.
And I don't care who they are, whether or not they're an outlaw motorcycle gang member, a Hell's Angel or whatever. There are ways of getting through. I remember interviewing Hell's Angel here, and anyway, as you know, they make no comment interviews to the police. And I said to him, I had to build a rapport with this guy, and I went on the LEAP database, which is like a police database, and I noticed that his ex-partner took out an intervention order which prevented him from seeing his son. And I said to him, geez, it must be tough not being able to see your boy. And next minute, he starts opening up, whereas before he was saying nothing. Anyway, he starts talking, and I said, so when's the last time you saw your boy? And blah, blah, blah. Now, even though he's a bike, he's still a father.
Yeah.
And for me, it was imperative to establish some sort of, rapport, not even thinking he's going to give me anything. At the end of the interview, which he made a no-comment interview, he writes a name on a piece of paper, then slides it over to me. That was the guy who I was looking for. So I believe that if we use rapport correctly, it's a great tool. However, sometimes people don't spend any time in building that connection or rapport. If I do a polygraph test and somebody fails, well, I want some sort of cooperative, information that can either be validated or, alibis can be checked or defences can be, examined or investigated. So it's part of the process. It's a great tool. And once again, just going back to, say, EyeDetect or Verify, the advantage is a person feels comfortable doing it in their own place.
Yeah, that's true.
Providing the conditions are right, of course, as you would expect. But also, there's no bias by an interviewer or examiner. So that is an advantage.
Yeah. Well, Steve, this has been a fantastic conversation. I can't leave the conversation, though, we can't leave. Tell us a little bit more about this new TV series that's come out in the last handful of weeks.
Yeah, being a movie star, too. That's amazing. Your next
the list
career.
Goes on. That's why I said, I'm like, I think I've just scratched the surface with the bio. This guy, the stories go on. So, yeah, tell us a little bit more about the series and how we could view it.
Well, ironically, I used to have a manager in New York, and I was doing a little bit of work over there, and I appeared on CNN. I was interviewed by Sanjay Gupta, who's their chief medical correspondent. And I didn't know this at the stage, but it went to air, and my manager rang up, and Jennifer Lopez, believe it or not, had seen it and wanted to basically sign me up. She had a production company, or two, actually, New York and Productions and JLo Enterprises. And I'd been offered a couple of television shows in the US, but to be honest, they weren't in my lane. They're not anything that I really wanted to do. Consequently, come back to Australia, and I was approached by a production company, and they said, look, we think you would be great, because I've done a lot of media and appeared on a lot of media television shows here, but not as a host. They said, look, we have an idea of a concept called The Hunters, where basically we go and analyse cold cases with a different approach, like a behavioural analysis approach, and using some of your techniques and stuff. So we were commissioned to film 6 90-minute specials, which the first one's gone to air. And it's basically looking at different cold cases, predominantly homicide cases. In some cases where children went missing, sexually assaulted and murdered, to gang-related murders and so on. So it's a very different approach. But yes, it apparently rated very well, the first episode, I'm told.
That's exciting.
It is. And I think it's currently airing in Australia. I'm not sure we have access to it in the US yet, but I'm eager to watch it when it comes. I keep telling my husband about it. I'm like, listen, this show's coming. So is it? Can we see it? Where can it be seen, or how can it be found?
Well, I'm told that there is a distribution company that is actually negotiating with the network in the US at the moment. Okay. I can't give away too much, but I will certainly let you know which network it will be on and screening times.
Well, that's lovely. Awesome. Steve, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. We know that, again, linking up the times in Australia to the U.S. is not always easy. So thank you for taking this time. And thank you all for listening. Mary Claire, thanks for being here.
Thank you, sir.
Yep. And we hope that you can all find the truth on your Truth Quest. And we hope to see you again next week. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of TruthQuest. If you'd like to be a guest on our show or would like to customize a solution for yourself or your business, email us directly at answers@iCanKnow.com. TruthQuest is brought to you by the #1 truth verification technology available today. Visit us at iCanKnow.com to learn more, and stay tuned for the next TruthQuest.